I was born in 1930, May the 10th, at Victoria Hospital. So that makes me 86. It opened in September 1969, but I started to sell work in March of that year, when a friend of mine who was an interior decorator gave me his walls, and I hung works by Jack Chambers. I had Greg Kernow. I had both Herb and Margot Aris. I had Tony Urquhart, and many other local artists who I'm forgetting their names for the moment. And it sold out. So I did the same thing in June, and it sold out. And then Robert Ehrig called me from Stratford. He was in charge of the Rothman Gallery at that time, and said that he had just had word from the Canada Council that the show that they had intended sending him, they weren't going to be able to do. He said, can you put something together for me to open, we'll say, within 3 weeks? I said, sure. I didn't know any better. So I curated my first exhibition for the Rothman Gallery in September. And I guess after that, it was pretty obvious to me where my path was going. And so I found a spot on Waterloo Street that was just perfect for me, and opened within a week or so. That continued until 1977, when I closed it, but I had already opened the Toronto Gallery in 1971. So the Toronto Gallery still continued for another year, and then I moved that over to Joan Martin, who had been my manager in Toronto and had operated under the name of Nancy Poole for quite some time after that. That came about through Joan Smith, who at the time was on the board. I think that was when she was on the board. Yes, she was on the board. She wasn't on City Council. And she was a friend of mine. And I think she said something, or I said something about, you'd be good at that. And I said, yeah, oh, I'd love it. That'd be great. What's going through my head is, because I thought, oh, good, yes, I'd never have to worry about paying the rent or paying the insurance. That would be somebody else's problem. It would just be wonderful. I'd have to do with art. And she phoned Jake Moore. And I don't know, with this idea. And then I received the phone call. And I was in England at the time, taking classes in art history. And they flew me home on a Friday, interviewed me on a Saturday, and flew me back to England on Sunday. And I was interviewed by Angus Mackenzie and, oh dear, he was Vice President Finance at the university, Alan Adlington. Thank you. Wonderful man. And I was offered the position, and I, of course, accepted. But when it went to the board, there was great consternation amongst the artists especially Greg Curnow. And so instead of having a year, I was given 6 months. And that was fine as far as I was concerned. And I learned then, at age 50, that that was really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the director of the London Regional Art Gallery, because that's all it was at that point. It wasn't also a museum. And learned that I still had to worry about who was going to pay the rent. Because it became, I've always been interested in the fact that my secretary, for a 2-year period, kept track, and only 6% of my time was spent actually on art. The rest of the time was spent on raising money, leaking roofs, water in the basement, complaining from artists who weren't getting exhibitions, that kind of thing. But it was the curators who had the fun. That came about because of Jack Hyatt. Professor Hyatt was a friend of mine, and when I did not get the appointment in 1980 to be the permanent director of the London Regional Art Gallery. So I said to Jack, I think what I need to do is get some credentials, because I had no credentials at all. And he said, no, what you need to do is research and write a book on the history of art in London. So I took his advice, and under his direction, I researched and wrote The Art of London. I did a great deal of research, and I had the good fortune to know many people who were in the arts, and people like Lenore Crawford, who was the art critic at the London Free Press. She was still alive and had an excellent memory. So I did a great number of tapes, which are in the archives. I don't know if anybody has the machinery anymore to listen to tapes, but I enjoyed the research. I enjoyed it very much. Don't know that I enjoyed the writing that much, but the research was fun. And I will give you a little story. In 1956, or 7, maybe it was 57, I was asked to be the token woman on the United Way board. It had previously been called the Community Chest, but I think now it was called the United Way. And I went to my first meeting, and I sat next to an older gentleman who was a friend of my family's, and I had known him for a long time. And something came up that puzzled me, and so I turned to him and I said, I don't understand what he's talking about. And he patted my hand and said, don't worry, you don't need to. So that was fine. I took that. However, as I was driving home, the penny dropped, and I realized how really insulting he had been, not intending to be. He had not intended to insult me, and I had been so, if you would use the expression, brainwashed, that I didn't even feel insulted until I was driving home. So that perhaps illustrates what the situation was in the 50s. The 60s made the big change, and of course by the 70s I was on the board at Western. There were 2 token women. It was important for every board to have at least one woman, so we were starting to make a difference. But I'm always intrigued when I think back to that occasion in the 50s. Now, to answer your second question about women and art, I used to really get very provoked when an artist who was a woman would come in and she would start by saying, I know I'm really not very good, but I thought maybe you could take a look. Well, that was absolutely the worst thing she could have done, because it made me so angry that if she didn't think she was good enough, how was I going to think she was good enough? And so I was very unpleasant about it all. In the end, of course, I would look at her work and tell her whether I thought I would be able to carry her work. And I tried to sort of back off from my initial outrage. But when a man came in, he was sure that he was the greatest artist ever produced. When a woman came in, she was so unsure of herself. And of course, it wasn't very pleasant of me to be cross with her, because what she needed was reassurance. And I like to think that ultimately I did give her reassurance and did this constantly. One of the things, especially for a woman, when she was having her first exhibition, I had this little speech always that if a work sells, that's fine, it sells. If it doesn't sell, okay, it doesn't sell. It doesn't have anything to do with the quality of the work. Because it can be pretty heartbreaking for an artist to see their work on the walls and not to see any red stickers. And the work can be excellent, but it's just not selling, which is another thing altogether from judging the merit of the work. I still saw this reticence all through the 80s. But then there came people like Shamili Hassan, Bernice Vincent, and Thelma Rosner. These were women who knew the quality of their work, and they knew that they had something to contribute. Margot was my age, and she always was reticent, even in 1995. I think probably I felt was my most important job was to develop the city's collection, because it is the city's collection, it belongs to the people of London, and to make sure that we saw that when a Paul Poole came on the market, or a Patterson Ewan, or a Jack Chambers, or a Greg Kernel, that we were in there as competing to get it, because we felt it was exceedingly important that those 4 London artists, that we could mount our own exhibition of their work, that there was sufficient variety in all they had. And we didn't really have to worry very much about Greg, because we had the Moore collection. But we did have some major holes as far as Chambers was concerned, and certainly Patterson's newer work, and some of Paul Peel's earlier pieces. And that was very important to me. The volunteer committee made it possible for us to do that, because the volunteer committee, through their various activities, the shop, their touring, so many things, the art rental, they would produce between $45,000 and $50,000 a year. Now, in this day and age, that doesn't sound like a great deal, but 20 years ago, that was a lot of money. And you could go into the art market with that amount of money and buy major works that I can remember being in Toronto and looking at an early Paul Poole, and I realized the gentleman beside me was Ken Thompson. And we were both looking at this, and I thought to myself, I think I want Mr. Thompson to know that I'm interested, not as a collector, but as the London Regional Art Gallery. So I introduced myself and said that I was here to see this on behalf of the art gallery. He smiled, so I don't think that he bid against me. But on that same painting, I wanted to be able to go into the auction knowing that I had the money. And it was going to be more than the $50,000 that would be coming that year. So I phoned Dick Ivey, who was on the island of Jersey at the time, told him what I was doing, and said, could you guarantee $100,000? And he said, absolutely. And we got it. So I always think that's a rather nice story. John White called me in 1971 to ask me if I would sit on the board of the Ontario College of Art. And I said, I think there will be a conflict of interest, John, because I'm about to open a gallery in Toronto. He said, no, don't worry about that. There's no conflict of interest. And he said, it's important that we have somebody on the board outside of Toronto. And he said, it's important we have a woman. So there we have it. Not only was I the token woman, but I was the token outsider from Toronto. So I went on the board, and the very first meeting, we were electing, no, it wasn't, we weren't electing anybody. We were approving the appointment of the new director of the Ontario College of Art, Roy Ascott from England. And everybody voted for him, and the chairman looked at me, and so I voted for him, not having a clue what I was doing. Taught me a lesson. Well, within a year, I found myself in a situation that I won't, it's too long a story to go into, but I was traveling with my family, and I received a telephone call from Robert Fulford, who also was on the board. I might have received a phone call when I was in Italy. It made me feel terribly important. And he said, would you consider being the chairman of the board? I had sat on a personnel committee for a while, so I think this is why they thought that I might be suitable, that at least I knew how to chair a meeting. And I said that I would let him know when I got back, and perhaps we should have a meeting. I'm not going to go into that whole story because it's a very lengthy one. But I did become I became the chairman of the board of the Ontario College of Art. Mr. Ascott and his vice director, assistant director, Monty Quinter. They were both relieved of their positions, and I found myself sitting in the director's office from April until August, trying to quell the little revolution that was taking place in the College of Art, and making sure that we would open in September. The rumor was that the government wanted to do to the College of Art what it had done to Osgoode Hall, so that the law was taught at York and that they would take the College of Art to York. Well, I didn't think I wanted that to happen on my watch. The College of Art had been there since the 1880s. I think we were 96 years old or something at the time, and I dug my heels in. And we got through it. But it was the best possible training ground for any future administrative position that I would be in, because I learned to deal with faculty, students, and the politicians at Queen's Park. And that was really a very important experience for me. I suppose what am I most proud of personally would be I have a marvelous young grandchild and daughter. So that's probably what I'm proudest of. But as far as the community is concerned, oddly enough, it will probably be the hundreds of boys that went through Hardy Geddes House, and still do. But in the area of the arts, I think there would probably be three things. And the Art of London would be one of them. Building the collection for the City of London. And making sure that the staff never again had to worry about whether or not they would be employed. There is an endowment there that produces sufficient funds so that the staff can feel comfortable. I think those were probably the things. I think. I don't know. The value of art to me. Oh, it's like life itself. The great art galleries of the world are my cathedrals. Something happens to me when I walk in to a great art gallery. Something happens when I am surrounded with great art that I can't explain. That's visceral. It has nothing to do with the head. It just happens. It's a kind of excitement that takes over. So that's what it means to me. This is my community. And I always feel I have a great love affair with London.